Okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Okay. Parshas Truma. I was planning on discussing something else, but hearing about some events that took place within the last few days, I felt compelled to talk about, in conjunction with the Sedra, about the events that took place. I, to a certain degree, I will have to try to control myself. It's just very, very upsetting what has taken place. But I will discuss it from the perspective of the Sedra, as I always do. In Parshas Truma, so we're told about the mitzvah of building the Mishkan and of all the Kalim. Now, when it talks in the Mishkan about the general mitzvah of building the Mishkan, it says Va'asuli Mikdash in the plural form. And when it talks about the individual kalim, the individual utensils, and the individual parts of the Mishkan, or things that were made for the Mishkan, it says Vasisa in the singular form. But when it talks about the Aron, it says Va'asu Aron. And the Mefarshim say that all Klal Yisrael, when it comes to the Kesed Torah, to the crown of Torah, so that's something that all Klal Yisrael can participate in the building of the Aron. I want to suggest a certain explanation, and I've seen that this explanation that I have thought of has been suggested by others. And also, again, question coming, we know that by the Aron, as opposed to the other utensils of the Mishkan, because in the Midbar, in the desert, all the kalim, all the utensils, whether it was the menorah, it was the mizbeach, the shulchan, they were all carried with badim, with stabs, that were connected with rings that were attached. But with the other utensils, when the utensils were placed in the place, the stabs could be removed. But with the Aron, not only in the Midbar, but even when the Aron was brought into the Beis HaMikdash, and it was put in the Kodesh Kodashim, in the Holy of Holies, the stabs could not be removed. And the question is, why is it? All kinds of explanations are offered, because many say, because the Aron contained the luchos, and in time of danger, you have to preserve, make sure, more important than anything else, was to make sure that the luchos were saved, were not taken by an enemy, that they should be able to be hidden right away. Others say that it was to emphasize the point, and maybe we'll get into that Torah is not limited to a place. In a sense, when you keep the stabs in the Aron becomes like a suitcase. When a person keeps everything he has in the suitcase, in other words, he's preparing himself to leave, even if he doesn't know when he's going to leave. But he's always he could leave at moment's notice. And symbolically, we could say that is to guard the luchos, but also it's to show that Torah has to be taken from place to place, has to be taken from city to city. And it was a symbolism, but a symbolism that has a very important lesson. But I want to suggest something different. And I have suggested it in the past. The Rambam in Hilchos Klei HaMikdash. So he lists the different kalim, the different the Rambam in Hilchos Beis Bechira lists the different kalim, the different utensils that were part of the mitzvah of Binyan Beis HaMikdash, the different utensils. And he does not list the Aron there as one of the utensils. And if you take a look in the Igros Hagrid, my uncle's sefer of his chuvas, it's a letter written to my grandfather. So he deals with that problem. Now, and he raises some other problems also. And these are problems that were raised by many. In Bayesheni, the Aron with the Luchos were hidden at the end of Bayis Rishon. And the question is, why, when they built the Bayesheni, when they made new kalim for the Beis HaMikdash, didn't they make an Aron? It's true, they didn't have the Luchos. But why didn't they make an Aron? Because it was one of the utensils of the Beis HaMikdash. And my uncle suggests that the Aron was not considered a utensil of the Beis HaMikdash, was not considered one of the Klei HaMikdash. In other words, the Aron was made for the Luchos, for the tablets of the Ten Commandments. And wherever it was necessary to take the Ten Commandments, the Aron was used. The purpose of the Aron was not to be in the Beis HaMikdash, but the purpose of the Aron was to serve as a receptacle, to hold the Aseres HaDibros. And because of that, but when the Aron was taken from place to place in the Midbar, it's easy to visualize that. A little bit more difficult to visualize it once the Beis HaMikdash was built. But we know the halacha was that when the Jewish people went to war, the Aron was taken with them whenever they went to war. So the Aron served the purpose of being a receptacle to hold the Aseres HaDibros. And between different situations where the Aron was taken from one place to another, from one battlefield to another, and sometimes from one place to another, the Aron, the Aron was placed in the Kodesh Kodashim, but the Aron itself was not made as a utensil of the Beis Hamikdash. Consequently, we could suggest, since it was not a Klei Hamikdash, so the halacha wants to emphasize the nature of the Aron. The Aron was to serve as a receptacle to hold the Aseres HaDibros. And the Aseres HaDibros was made to take in from place to place, from one battlefield to another battlefield. And sometimes when it was necessary, from one place to another place. Sometimes from one place in the Beis Hamikdash, from the Kodesh Kodashim on the upper level, as the Rambam points it out, to a chamber that was below it, below the Beis Hamikdash. But to emphasize that the Aron wasn't made to be in one spot, but to take it from place to place, and consequently was not a Klei HaMikdash, at least according to the Rambam. So because of that, we could suggest that that's the reason why the badim, the staves, had to remain constantly, even when the Aron was addressed, to identify the true nature of the Aron. And that's, we could suggest that this is also why Va'asu is mentioned in regard to the Mishkan in general, but to the individual kalim utensils in the Beis Hamikdash, it's Vasisa, you shall make. But when it comes to the Aron, it's not included in the Va'asu of the whole Mishkan, because the Aron had its own significance, its own purpose. Now, that's why in Bayesheni, there was no need to build an Aron, because the Aron was not a utensil of the Beis Hamikdash. It was a utensil was used to house the Aseres HaDibros, the Luchos. So in Bayesheni, when they didn't have Luchos, there was no need to build an Aron. There was no need to make an Aron for the Beis Hamikdash. Now it's true that there is a machlokus whether there were two Aronos or one Aron. It's a machlokus in the Yerushalmi, and there seems to be a machlokus Rishonim. There are those who say that there was only one Aron, and when the Jews went to war, they would take the Aron out of the Beis Hamikdash to the battlefield. And there are those who say there were two Aronos. One Aron contained the Luchos, and that Aron that contained the Luchos, remained in the Kodesh Kodashim. It was not taken out to war. But there was another Aron, and in the second Aron, in the second ark, were the Shivrei Luchos, the broken pieces of the first Luchos. And those were taken to war when the Jewish people had to fight their enemies. Now, we have to understand, certainly, according to the opinion that the luchos, that the luchos, there was only one aron. There was one ark that contained in it the second luchos as well as the broken parts of the first luchos. And when the Jewish people went to war, the luchos went with them. So we understand the necessity of the significance of the Shekhinah going out to the battlefield with the Jewish people. And this is understandable according to the opinion of the Rambam, that the luchot, that the aron was not a klei hamikdash. But even according to the Ramban's opinion is that the aron was a klei hamikdash, that the ark was a utensil of the Beis Hamikdash, and the Ramban says that the Ramban says that if the aron would be destroyed, the Jewish people would have to make another aron, just like they would have to make another utensil, and just like they had to make other utensils to make over the utensils of the Beis Hamikdash when they built the second Beis Hamikdash. So if the aron would be destroyed, except according to the Ramban, we could suggest that the first of all, that possibly the aron was always in the Beis Hamikdash. It was in the chamber underneath. And also we could suggest that according to the Ramban, the halach, there was a special halacha by an aron. The aron only has shivas, only has importance if the luchos are in there. But if the luchos are not in there, it's just the aron. The aron has no significance. That's something special in regard to the aron, as opposed to the other luchos, the other kalim, the other utensils of the Beis Hamikdash. Now, I think that the idea is that when the Jewish people go to war, the Torah goes with them. The luchos go with them. Unfortunately, we do not have access to the aron. We do not have access to the luchos. And the question is, so how? How do we bring the Torah to the battlefield when we fight the enemies of the Jewish people? Now, my uncle doesn't address that problem, but but he addresses another problem in his shir. It's in Shirim L'Seicha Memori. He talks about the sanctification of Eretz Yisrael, and his theory is that it was through the aron that Yahushua sanctified Eretz Yisrael. But then he discusses in Bayesheni the Jewish people went up, and initially there was no war. How was Eretz Yisrael sanctified? And my uncle suggests that there was a difference between Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni. He says in Bayis Rishon, during the first Commonwealth, the sanctification of Eretz Yisrael was done through the Aron, represented the Torah Shebechsav, through the written tradition. In Bayis Sheni, the sanctification was done, he said, through the Torah Shebaal Peh. And what is the difference between Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shebaal Peh? Torah Shebechsav, the written Torah, is written on objects. It's something extraneous to the people. We take a Sefer Torah and we read from the Sefer Torah. Torah Shebaal Peh, certainly in its original form, could not be learned from a text. It was not taught, certainly Barabbim, from a text. But the Torah Shebaal Peh and the Jewish people is one. And when the Jewish people went up to Eretz Yisrael and settled in the lands, so the Torah Shebaal Peh, that was part and parcel of them, sanctified the land of Israel in the second Beis HaMikdash. And my uncle associates the Torah Shebechsav with Kibush and the Torah Shebaal Peh with Chazaka. I want to suggest that even today, when the Jewish people go to war, the Torah goes out with them. We don't have the Aron. But the Torah is part of the Jewish people who go out to war. Certainly, and Chas v'Shalom not limiting it, certainly the Torah Shebaal Peh is the Torah Shebaal Peh is goes out with the soldiers who otherwise are sit and learn Torah. In a sense, they become like the Aron, that when it's at rest in the Beis HaMikdash. It's at rest in the Kodesh Kodashim. But when there is a special need, the Aron was taken out. And the Badim were kept there to serve as a reminder that there are times when the Aron will not be in the Beis HaMikdash. All the other utensils are made to remain in their place. The Aron was made in order to take the Torah as it was necessary to accompany the Jewish people on the battlefield. And these soldiers who sit in the Beis HaMikdash, who sit in the Beis Medrash, and sit and learn Torah, who sit in the Mikdash Miyat, they are in place of the Aron with the Torah that's part of them. And I want to suggest that Torah Shabbal Peh suggests, it's obvious. The Torah Shabbal Peh is not limited to the words of the Gemara. Torah Shabbal Peh is not even limited, even though we use the word Bial Peh. It's not limited. The Masorah of Torah Shabbal Peh to words that are given over. Torah Shabbal Peh is the parts of Torah that were not written down. Torah Shabbal Peh contains, besides the words that weren't written down, the parts of Torah that couldn't be written down, that can only be given b'Masorah, from one generation to the other generation. I've mentioned many times that we see that when Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai, so it mentions that Yehoshua accompanied him part of the way. And Rashi says, Mativo shel Yehoshua kan. What is the purpose of Yehoshua here? And the answer is that Torah Shabbal Peh is not, Rashi says, but he was Talmido shel Moshe. So he accompanies his Rabbi. But I think it's more than just that. What it is the Torah Shabbal Peh is not limited to the words that Moshe wrote, that Moshe said. Torah Shabbal Peh, Moshe Rabbeinu's expressions, his feelings, his actions. That was all part of Torah Shabbal Peh. And Yehoshua, who is the one that's giving over the Torah to the future generations, it wasn't just the shiurim that he gave over. It was the ideas that were contained, the feelings and the emotions that were contained on the face of Moshe Rabbeinu. Even as he's going up to Har Sinai, to the extent that Yeshua is able to take him. And there is a Masorah of Torah Shabbal Peh that is given over from generation to generation. The giving over of Torah Shabbal Peh was not limited to the walls of the Beis HaMikdash. The Mesiras Nefesh of generations on behalf of Torah, on behalf of the Jewish people, on behalf of the survival of the Jewish people. That's also part of the Torah Shabbal Peh. Can you put it into writing? About the Mesiras Nefesh, that individual Jews, in the time of the Vilna Gaon, there was a gzera to throw all the Jews out of Vilna, and many Jews would have been killed in the process. Because someone, not a Jew, chas v'shalom, but it was, Meshumed actually. It was a Meshumed. He took something from a church and then blamed the Jews for it. and there was a decree, and many Jews were arrested, and they probably would have been killed. And then one simple Jew, not necessarily a Talmud Chacham, he told Shmuel, who was the Rav of Vilna, and I think he told the Vilna Gaon, he says, I'm going to say that I stole the thing, even though I didn't steal it. And he knew that he was going to be tortured and he was going to be killed. And he told Reb Shmuel, some say he told the Gra also. At first he asked whether it's a mutter for him. And then, on the basis of the fact, he said he looked in the Megillah and he saw the Mesiras Nefesh of Esther, what she did to save Klal Yisrael. He said, I don't need to get a psak. I know myself. He told the Gra, or he sent a message to the Gra. I know myself. He saw it from the Megillah Esther. He didn't learn the Rambam and Hilchos Yesodei Torah about Kiddush Hashem. There are feelings and emotions and commitments that can't be put into words. And sometimes the one who takes the initiative is not from the Talmidei Chachamim. It's from the common person. People who you would not have heard otherwise from. I heard from my father that the Gra said after this person was killed that everybody should be noeg avelis for the person because he saved everybody. And these soldiers who go out and fight on behalf of Klal Yisrael. So those who are learning the base medrash, they're like the Aron that's taken out of the Kodesh Kadoshim. But even those that don't sit and learn in the base medrash, even those that weren't Shomrei Torah and mitzvahs, they have a Masorah also. A Masorah that we could learn from. And when we do not show these soldiers respect, besides the fact that it shows a lack of midos, it shows being kofi tov, because they're saving the lives of the Jewish people. Right now, it's the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael. Some who are in denial. There are those who are so foolish and stupid that they go around saying that they don't need the army because they're sitting and learning Torah. They would have no problem. We don't owe them anything. How short are their memories? How many from Jews were killed because of terrorist attacks? What do you think? The Jews and the boys learning in Chevron Yeshiva in 1929 were any less involved in Torah learning than you are? the Jews of Hebron, at that time were offered soldiers, and they said they had no problems. They were on good terms with the Arabs. They didn't just attribute it to those learning Torah. They attributed it to other things. But don't you learn a lesson from 1929? People are stupid when they choose to be stupid. Unfortunately, they convenience allows them to be stupid. I'm not suggesting that yeshiva boys have to go to the army, especially those that don't want to go to the army. I personally feel, I'll say it publicly, I probably indicated it before, that those yeshiva boys probably would do more harm to the army being in the army than being outside the army. I think it's in the interest of Klal Yisrael that they not be in the army. I mean, I've heard of situations, I'm not going to go into details, where people insisted, Rosh Hashanah, when they were at battle, to blow the shofar. I didn't hear it firsthand. And because of that, the enemy was aware of where the Israeli soldiers were. And there are many other situations that I heard of where soldiers who came out of yeshiva, they didn't have the mindset of how an army has to be run. And certainly, these are those who went to the army. But certainly those that don't want to go to the army, you think that they're going to be able to act on the battlefield in a manner that will help the Jewish cause? Obviously not. You have to have a certain mindset, and they don't have that mindset. And you could say, we'll give them that mindset, and it's not going to work. And why is it that all of a sudden, after October 7th, the Jewish people were united in a way that I hadn't seen since the Six-Day War? And then all of a sudden, and this started with the Chilonim, all of a sudden, the issue of drafting the yeshiva boys came up again. You think those that brought it up don't realize that it will be not conducive to the benefit of Israel, to their war effort, to have people who don't have the mindset for the war. Those who want to, that recognize their responsibility, whose devotion to Klal Yisrael, they can be the best soldiers. But those who don't want to go, and who weren't trained about almost anything outside the four walls of the Beis Medrash, So those people will 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 obviously will not help Klal Yisrael win their battle. But these Chilonim who initiated this rift in Klal Yisrael this time, they weren't motivated by the interest of the Jewish people, of the state of Israel. They were motivated by political concern. They were upset with the unity that existed because they see their future, their political future, enhanced when there is division between the Haredim and the rest of the Jewish people. But the reaction of the Haredim, or the so-called Haredim, the reaction was intensified the problem. And it's the reaction, what caused the problem, what intensified the problem was an attitude that began long ago. It's the attitude regarding the soldiers. Let's say we feel that it's important to Torah study, for people to sit and not have their Torah study interfered with by military service. Let's assume that for a while. But why do you have to look down at the person who is giving his life for Klal Yisrael and for you as well? These people are giving their lives. You see, yeshivas, if somebody will give a big donation, certainly in the old days, before we had all this Orthodox money, the guests of honor of yeshivas were very often not Shomrei Torah mitzvahs, but they supported the Torah institutions. They were the guests of honor. Sometimes it was embarrassing what they would mention in their speeches. Many of them were intermarried. And they made no secret of it when they received the awards from the yeshivas. But the yeshivas felt that they had to give them honor because they were supporting Torah, whether they knew what Torah was or they didn't know what Torah was. But when someone is giving their life for you and you spit at them, so you're saying to them, I do not recognize the sacrifice you're making for me. And when you say that you're not recognizing the sacrifice you made for me, in a sense, you are falling into a trap, because the Chilonim, they want to promote this division in Klal Yisrael. Remember how after October 7th, everybody, they saw the pictures of soldiers without yarmulkes being Makabel Shabbos together with the soldiers with the yarmulkes. So it's true. The recent division, the reason that took place was started by political motivation. But some of the Haredim intensified it. You demonstrate, you block traffic, you're stopping ambulances from going through the streets, you're stopping the buses, you're interfering with people's with special necessities, with doctors, with children have to be taken to doctors. Do you think you're going to promote greater respect? I'm not saying don't demonstrate. You can demonstrate, but you have to demonstrate in a dignified manner, not in a manner that will promote greater division in Klal Yisrael, greater feelings against the religious Jews, greater feelings against the yeshiva boys. The seeds of the problem, the weeds of the problem, let me call it, whatever you want to call it, we see that now. But what caused this problem began a long time ago. Person should say, I recognize what you're doing for the Jewish people. I recognize what you're doing for me, for my family. I recognize how you're stopping terrorism. I recognize that to some degree, you're giving me the ability to sit and learn. Even more so than those who give money to the institutions and who are their guests of honor. But you are joining the attempts of the Chilonim. And you're making the situation much worse. We know what happened in Bnei Brak. And we saw pictures turning over the police cars that had tefillin in them. Burned pairs of tefillin. Regarding tefillin, B'ro kol amei aretz ki shem Hashem nikra elecha v'yoru mimeka. Elu tefillin shebarosh. The problem, story is very famous. I mentioned here very often. The Vilna Gaon says, it says Eil Tefillin Shebarosh. It's not Tefillin Al Harosh. Maybe the message of the burnt tefillin is that the tefillin has to affect our character. That there has to be tefillin shebarosh. Kishem Hashem nikra alecha. But when we do all these things, and we act in an irrational manner. We act sometimes like the hoodlums in the United States sometimes, who also turn over police cars. Very interesting. The Satmar Rebbe, who you would have expected, who is certainly not Zionistically oriented, but he made a declaration. Don't attend these demonstrations. I'm not arguing. It's okay to have demonstrations, but it has to be done in a proper manner. The Gemara tells us that there was a Xera from the Romans at one time against practicing, against bris milah, against observance of Shabbos. And the Chachamim sought the advice of a princess who was involved with the royal family of Rome. And she advised them to make a demonstration, but a dignified demonstration, to say hello, Av Echad L'Kulanu, not to talk against them. Perhaps make a demonstration if we want the people to recognize the contribution of Torah to Klal Yisrael. They're not going to recognize the contribution of Torah to Klal Yisrael on a pshat that somebody is going to have in the Rambam. But they will recognize it by the way they act. Torah has to be apparent. The Masorah is not limited to the words of Torah. The Masorah has to be part of the character. It has to see, they have to see the Shem Hashem Nikra Alecha. Do you think that if you turn over cars, if you set fire to cars that have tefillin in it, they see the Shem Hashem? Masorah of Torah Shabbal Peh is not limited to the words of Torah. It's the character, that the impact that it has on the personality of the people. And I think people are forgetting that. People want a demanding recognition of the significance of Torah, when one cannot see the impact of Torah on character. There was probably no greater harm done to recognition of the impact that Torah has on character than what has happened lately with these demonstrations. Why can't we come together and say, we recognize your contribution. We see that you're being Moshe Nefesh. and at the same time say to act in a manner that they will be able to recognize the contribution of the Bnei Torah. Unfortunately, there were members of the Haredi community fell in a trap. And they took the bait. You can demonstrate, but you have to demonstrate in a manner that shows how Torah affects your personality. And maybe going around and showing how people from yeshivas help others out. And while they're at it, maybe the yeshiva should work on that being also part of the instructions that they give them. It doesn't have to be in an official manner. It could be in an unofficial manner. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, many of the Doli Balei Musar were involved in helping individuals out who were sick, who were in need. And I think the problem here is the perception of Jewish leadership. I think this is what it boils down to. At one time, I want to suggest that there is a difference between the leadership that was provided historically by Rabbanim, and historically this is not 100%, and leadership that was provided by Rosh Yeshivas. The Rabbanim saw themselves at the leaders of the community, not necessarily that everybody accepted themselves. But they saw that they were there to serve their whole community. Whether they all lived up to it or not, I don't know. Rosh Yeshivas, understandably, they see their position as providing for the yeshivas, for the yeshiva boy, for the yeshiva community. And sometimes when that's the nature of your position, you become less sensitive to people outside the yeshiva community. And that's understandable. That's your job. But if you have that attitude, don't see yourself as the leader of Klal Yisrael. You see yourself as the leader of a particular part of the Jewish people. And when the focus is only on part of the community, that builds up that the rest of the community is unimportant. And what they do is irrelevant. I think we have to understand the Masorah of Torah Shebaal Peh is not just on the page of the Gemara. It's not just on the page of the Rambam. It's in the daily lives of the people. And very often, certain individuals have certain aspects of the Torah Shebaal Peh in their character that other people don't have. And maybe when we come all together, there will be a form of shleimus, of completeness. But you should know, those that give their lives on behalf of Klal Yisrael, they also, that is part of the Masorah. It's perhaps not part of the Masorah that's learned on the page of the Gemara. but that's part of the Masorah that was given over from one generation to the other generation. And unfortunately, there's an attitude today that only the aspects of the Masorah that I have is part of Torah. And the truth of the matter is that there are aspects in Torah, in the personality of Jews all over, and all of it combined forms the Torah. There is a medrash that needs to be understood, that the different letters and the different words of the Torah correspond with the number of Jews that left Yetzias Mitzrayim, that went out from Egypt, that stood in Mount Torah. In other words, Torah is not something that is just written down. The Jewish people are part of the Torah, but each individual himself, every individual is part of the Torah. And sometimes we can learn things from Jews who are much less learned than we perceive ourselves to be. Because they might know certain things that we don't know. I once heard from a person told me that he was somehow related to the family of the Chavetz Chaim, that the Chavetz Chaim would stand up for the Shamash of Reb Chaim. I don't know if maybe the Chavetz Chaim stood up for all the Talmidim of Reb Chaim, but the Shamash of Reb Chaim. But there are probably certain things that the Shamash of Reb Chaim saw in Reb Chaim that the Talmidim didn't see. The Talmidim focused on the Shiurim of Reb Chaim. They focused on many other things that he said, that he did, that he said. But the Shamash was able, because he probably didn't focus on the Shiurim. See, he took notice of things that others didn't take notice. And a person can learn, not just from the Talmidim of Reb Chaim, who focused on the Shiurim of Reb Chaim, but for how Reb Chaim acted with people, the chesed that he did, his concern for every Jew, his taking in young children, even children, babies, taking babies into his house, who were born out of wedlock, whose mother left them at the doorstep of Reb Chaim's house. Why? Because Reb Chaim, I don't know if Reb Chaim saw himself as a leader of Klal Yisrael, but he certainly was a leader of Klal Yisrael. He was a leader of all the Jewish people. And every Jew was important. He did chesed for every Jew. It made no difference if a Jew was Shomer Torah mitzvahs or not. Of course, he helped B'nai Torah, went out of his way, but he was concerned about all Jews. And perhaps to somewhat of a lesser degree, the Rabbanim were concerned because that was their job. They were the heads of the Jewish community in the towns. But the nature of leadership changed. And now the leadership, to a large degree, was given over to the Rosh Yeshivas. And unfortunately, when they assumed that leadership, as heads of parts of Klal Yisrael. And if we're going to have unity in Klal Yisrael, the leaders of Klal Yisrael have to begin. And hopefully, when we recognize how every part of Klal Yisrael needs the other part of Klal Yisrael, how the yeshiva boys need the soldiers, and the soldiers need the yeshiva boys. Then we will have true leadership for Klal Yisrael, religious leadership, and otherwise as well. And I mean, I didn't answer what I wanted to say to all the questions, but I wanted to just mention that we should not fall into a trap in increasing the disunity and the fighting among the Jewish people, especially when we have enemies all around us. And just because there's a ceasefire doesn't mean the enemies aren't around us. We have to be concerned about Iran. We have to be concerned of Iran's satellites, and they'll come into the cities, and they will attack the shuls, and they will attack the Bate Midrashos also. We have to work to restore the unity that existed after October 7th, because only in restoring that unity will we be able to be successful as a nation, as Klal Yisrael, and everybody doing their own task, working together. Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi Moshe. Any questions in the chat? It doesn't look like any questions. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay.